Welcome here to Awaken Church this morning, this cold, somewhat snowy, somewhat warm, humid, whatever kind of day you want to call it. It's not sunshiny outside, that's all I know. We're grateful to have you here this morning. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Derrik, Filippo. I am the youth pastor here at Awaken Church, and I teach the youth on Sunday nights. I coordinate all of our youth activities, and occasionally they allow me to speak to adults, and this happens to be one of those Sundays that I get to talk to adults, so woohoo! Can you believe that it is only 2 weeks until Christmas? 2 weeks. 2 weeks. Not 2 days, fortunately, but 2 weeks. It seems like I just blinked and it was Thanksgiving, like yesterday. But there are 2 weeks left until Christmas. And we are talking about a series of white noise. And that series focuses around this season, the season that is Christmas. Yes. Yeah, Christmas. And specifically we're talking about distractedness, and distractedness from the things that we should be celebrating, the things that we should be focusing on in this time of year. And so I'm going to start off, and I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. So this is an audience participation kind of thing, all right? So if you're not participating, I'm going to start calling on people individually, all right? So this is your encouragement to participate. I'm going to give you a couple of easy questions to start us off, all right? So when you think of Christmas, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
Jesus.
Elves.
All right, well, Jesus, you guys must be cheating or something. See, honestly though, but think about it. Just when you think about just the Christmas season, is it friends? Is it family? Is it shopping? Good food? Presents? Decorations? The holiday rush? Busyness in general? To be honest, a lot of these things are what first come to my mind sometimes when I think about the Christmas season. What else? For all of my career, I've worked construction in some form of projects that have had tax incentives that oftentimes expire or run out at the end of the year. And so this has caused always an end of the year crunch in terms of we got to get projects built, we got to get them done, and they got to be done by 12/31. And this is construction you're talking about. And so that means that for every year, pretty much, for my entire career, there's always been this push at the end of the year to get whatever projects we're working on done. Because, heaven forbid that we actually start working on these projects in February and get them done by like June, and hey, there's no rush. No, we don't start until like October, so. But that would make just too much sense. But you throw all of that on top of, we'll just talk about just the month of December. December 4th is my oldest child's birthday. December 13th is my wife's birthday. December 18th is our anniversary. December 24th is my daughter's birthday. And then you have the 25th, which is, of course, Christmas. And then you throw all of the other holiday stuff on top of that. Travel, opening gifts, eating good food, all of that. And I don't have the bandwidth for a lot else. What about you? Are you so busy during the Christmas season that you just don't have a lot of room for much else? What about the past few Christmases, 3, 4, 5 Christmases, has been most memorable to you? Are there any big memories that stick out? All right, well, let me start with maybe a slightly easier question. What is the purpose of Christmas? What is it that we're celebrating? Audience participation, remember, right? What is it that we're participating? Or what is it that we're celebrating? Jesus' birth. That's right, we're celebrating the birth of Jesus Christ. This is significant because it represents the beginning of the story that forms the linchpin of Christianity. If Jesus was not born, then he probably wasn't fully a man. If he just appeared in place, you would probably question whether he was really human just like we are, right? Because none of us just appeared, fully born, or fully grown as we currently are, right? No, we were all born as a baby. And if Jesus wasn't fully man, then he couldn't really die. And if he couldn't really die, then he couldn't really pay for our sins. And if he couldn't really pay for our sins, then what on earth are we doing here this morning? There is no Christianity without Christ. Christ is not an allegory. He is not a metaphor. He's a literal man who was literally born and literally lived and literally died. And he literally rose from the dead. Without this, what we are doing here this morning, or any other Sunday morning for that matter, has absolutely no point. If that didn't happen, if Jesus wasn't born, if he didn't die, then we might as well just go home. Because there's no point in us being here. So let me ask you a slightly tougher question. If an alien race were to park a spaceship in orbit around our planet and to just observe us during this season, during this time of year, what would they say that we're doing? What would they say that we're celebrating? What would they say at all? Any guesses? Well, actually, they'd probably say something like, Hab Saslikich! At least they would if they were a Klingon ship and they were trying to insult us by commenting on the smoothness of our mothers' foreheads. But that's neither here nor there. But seriously, if someone were to just sit back and observe us for the Christmas season, what would they say we are focused on? What would they say that we spend most of our time doing? What would they say that we're celebrating?
Stuff.
Santa Claus.
If we're honest, it'd probably have something to do with a fat man in a red suit, or a conical-shaped tree, or four-hoofed mammals primarily found in northern climates. Or they might comment on this really strange practice that we have of going to these huge buildings and exchanging plastic or green paper for these random objects. And we take these random objects and we wrap them up in brightly colored paper and we shove them underneath this conical tree. And we go and we shake these objects and we rip off the brightly colored paper. And then we go right back to that big place where we got them and exchange them for more green paper. It's a really strange practice when you think about it at its core. Highly illogical. But would anyone or anything, after having spent some time observing us over the Christmas season, reasonably say that we spend our time worshiping the one man responsible for the single most pivotal moment in all of human history? No, probably not. You know, the past couple of weeks, we've been discussing this concept of white noise and just how easily we get distracted from the things that hold our attention during this season. Or that hold our attention, get distracted from the things that should hold our attention during this season. When Josh defined white noise last week as, a bunch of different frequencies blending in to kind of make this static. A different analogy struck me, and one that I think that's particularly relevant to what we're discussing this week. Who knows what a white noise generator is? Ever seen one of these?
They use them in court.
You use them in court, that's right. What is the purpose of this?
To drown out everything else.
To drown out background noise, that's right. So you've got this device that's essentially just a speaker, right? And the speaker emits a noise. It could be, rain. Everybody can hear that? It could be a summer night. Could be an ocean, the waves crashing on the ocean, or a heartbeat. Could also just be a waterfall, right? It could be any number of noises. But the purpose of this is to drown out background noises, oftentimes so that we can sleep. If you're a member of my wife's family, you actually might just prefer the sound of a box fan running on medium. Weird, I know. But I come to find out that's actually much more prevalent than I ever realized. I'm kind of a dead silence kind of guy when I sleep. But you're supposed to play these things at a high enough volume that they drown out other background noises. Could be an ambulance siren. Could be dogs barking. Could be children running up and down the hall causing mischief. Right? But whatever you're trying to do, you're trying to drown out these noises so that your sleep is uninterrupted. Now, for some people, this means that this plays at a volume that just hovers in and out of consciousness. For others, they play at a volume that would drown out a rock concert. But does this begin to sound familiar with our own distractedness during the season? We get so caught up in the busyness of all that's associated with this season that we completely miss the fact we should just take some time to stop and worship the very reason we celebrate this season. Have you ever gotten to the Christmas season, the end of it, and just wondered where it all went? Have you ever wondered just how the season completely passed you by? Don't let that be you this year. This morning we're going to look at a story in the book of Matthew, a story whose characters you are probably very familiar with, but maybe a story that you don't actually know the details all that well. We're going to look at the story of some guys who did not get distracted by all that was going on around them. Some guys who, if anything, had every right to be distracted. But instead they pressed on to find the infant Christ and to offer him their praise and give gifts to him and to honor him. And we're going to look at the story of the wise men. But first off, let me ask you, how many wise men were there? 3. Amy, how many wise men were there? 3? All right. Anybody? Any other answers? Carolyn. More than 15. I like it. So would it surprise you if I told you that we don't actually know how many wise men there were? Tradition holds that there were 3 because of the 3 gifts that were brought. Now, if you are from the South, you would know that Southern tradition actually holds that these men were also firefighters. Because Matthew 2:1 says that they came from afar. I'll let that one sink in for a minute. But seriously, Matthew 2:1 says this, and we're going to bring it up on the screen. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived unexpectedly in Jerusalem. Wise men. Just wise men. Nothing about the quantity. The only reference in Scripture to these men, and it doesn't refer to an actual number. Did you know that the Eastern Orthodox Church actually holds that there were 12 wise men? 12. Let's be honest, if there were 12, our nativity scenes would start to get a little crowded, wouldn't they? If we're going to be historically accurate, the wise men wouldn't be at the nativity scenes anyway. But more on that later. Where did these wise men come from? Who were they? Any guesses? All right? To start to understand who these men were, we have to actually travel all the way back to 2 Kings 24, 11 through 14. All right? This is all the way back in the Old Testament. And we're going to read a couple of verses here, and we're going to see probably nothing about wise men, to be honest. But let's read. Starting in verse 11. Then King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came to the city while his servants were besieging it. Jehoiachin, king of Judah, along with his mother, his servants, his commanders, and his officials, surrendered to the king of Babylon. So the king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign. He also carried off from there all the treasures of the Lord's temple and the treasures of the king's palace. And he cut into pieces all the gold articles that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the Lord's sanctuary, just as God had predicted. Then he deported all Jerusalem and all the commanders and all the fighting men, 10,000 captives, and all the craftsmen and all the metalsmiths. Except for the poorest of the land, no one remained. Wise men, right? No. But these verses are the first biblical reference to what's commonly referred to as the Babylonian exile. At least it's commonly referred to that if you're a biblical scholar or familiar with the history of the nation of Israel. Most of us would probably not commonly refer to this as the Babylonian exile. But this is significant because Babylon is located in what became the Persian Empire. And Persia is located in modern day Iran, Iraq, which is east of Israel. Wise men came from the east. So it's actually a very reasonable jump to make and say that these wise men were coming from this area of Persia. All right? But what is significant about the verses that we just read? You see, when all of Israel, except for the poorest of the land, was sent into exile, they took with them the knowledge and probably some of the actual writings of some of what forms our Old Testament. Specifically, we're looking at the books of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And what really begins to get interesting here is while the purpose of this exile was actually to culturally brainwash them, was to remove all ties to their homeland, in a sense. What we see actually begin to happen is they took these scriptures, and now these scriptures now become somewhat common knowledge, at least to those who are educated in the land to which they have been exiled to. And so all of a sudden we see that the story of the wise men actually starts hundreds of years before they ever packed up and started their journey. Because in part of the scriptures that the Israelites took with them during their exile was the book of Numbers. Specifically, we look at Numbers 24:17, which we're not going to show on the screen. But Numbers 24:17 says this, I see him, but not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come out of Jacob, and a scepter shall rise out of Israel. This is a prophecy alluding to Christ. But these wise men who had studied a lot of the writings of the ancient scripture, these wise men knew this prophecy. They knew a scepter would come out of Israel. What's the scepter? A scepter is a king. A king of kings will come out of Israel to the east. To the west for them. But a scepter, a king will come out of Israel. And what will herald the coming of this king? A star. And not just a star, but a star of stars. Because think about it. Stars come up in the sky all the time. Right? We probably don't see a lot of them around here. But think ancient Middle East. No light pollution. Middle of the desert. Cloudless sky. Tons of stars. So they have to recognize this star. So it's got to be something significant. Something impactful. And this is the star that we see referenced in Matthew 2, verse 2, which we're going to read. Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. We have seen his star. In fact, let's just go ahead and read that whole story right now. So join me as we read Matthew 2, 1 through 12. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived unexpectedly in Jerusalem, saying, Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star in the east, and we have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and the scribes of the people and asked them where the Messiah would be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they told him, because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the leaders of Judah, because out of you will come a leader who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod secretly summoned the wise men and asked them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him. After hearing the king, they went on their way, and there it was, the star that they had seen in the east. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw this star, they were overjoyed beyond measure. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother, and falling to their knees, they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. What makes this story all the more incredible when you think about it is the timeline. When the Magi saw this star, it's not like they packed their bags into their car. Let's see, what kind of car would the Magi drive? Probably an expedition, right? It's not like they packed their bags into their expedition and drove 1,200 miles to Jerusalem. No, they loaded up their camels and they began a journey which, under the best of circumstances, took them months. And in reality, probably took them a year or more. A year or more. I mean, just think about it. Do the math here. 1,200 miles. If you figure maybe they averaged about 10 miles a day, that's 120 days. That's 4 months of straight travel, nonstop, 7 days a week. Not stopping for food, not stopping for bad weather, not stopping when there's clouds in the sky at night and they can't see the star, not stopping when they got lost. All of those things probably happened. Think about it. They're following a star. What happens when it's raining at night? You got no idea where that star is. So a journey that took them 12 to 18 months, probably. These guys dropped everything that they were doing. They essentially put their entire lives on hold to follow a star. More than that, they brought with them extremely valuable gifts, knowing that at the end of their quest, they would be worshiping not just a king, but the King of Kings. Can you imagine what that conversation with their wives must have been like? Wait, you want to do what? You want to go where? What do you mean you don't know where you're going to go? How long are you going to be gone? What do you mean you don't know how long? 2 years? Are you kidding me? What do you mean you're going to need access to our bank account? How much do you need? What do you mean all of it? Right? Can you imagine that conversation? So you have these wise men, these magi, essentially early astrologers, who traveled from the west, from Persia, following a star that must have been so incredible that there was no doubt in their minds that it was the star prophesied in Numbers 24. These guys and all their entourage arrive in Jerusalem and they start asking about this king who has been born. And it's enough that it brings an uproar to the whole city of Jerusalem. And Herod himself starts to get concerned. Herod, who is the king of Jerusalem, he starts to get a little concerned. He's a little paranoid. King, I haven't had any children lately. Who's going to take my position? Right? So he calls together all the scribes and all those who are knowledgeable about the scriptures, and he asks them, where is the Messiah supposed to be born? Where is this King of Kings supposed to be born? Bethlehem, they tell him, after they have studied the scriptures. And after questioning the wise men closely and telling them to report back to him after they find the child, Herod shares this information with them. He tells them, hey, he should be born in Bethlehem, right? And so they continue on their way. And I imagine that their excitement here, their anticipation must have been palpable. I mean, just think about it. Their journey of a year plus is finally coming to an end. They finally have a destination in mind, and they walk out of Jerusalem. And what do they see? But they see the star. And they keep following this star. Undissuaded, undistracted. They keep following this star. This star finally comes to rest above the place where Mary and Joseph are staying. Now, the flip side is, I imagine that their anticipation, their excitement here was probably somewhat dampened by the fact that they didn't find the king in Jerusalem, capital of Israel, right? Surely the king should be in a palace in Jerusalem. But no, they get to Bethlehem, which is a teeny tiny town. And the star comes to rest above, not the stable and the manger anymore, but probably some humble dwelling, not the place of a king. And they walk in, and I imagine that this room got a little crowded as these wise men came into the home with all of their servants bearing the gifts. And they see this child that's probably about 18 months old, probably starting to walk, starting to talk a little bit. And they just fall to their knees, and they start worshiping him. And they offer their gifts. These men sacrificed everything to worship the Christ. Sure, they probably had wealth and homes that they were going to return to. But for a period of 2 years or more, when you factor in the return trip, these guys were living on the road, riding on camels, probably not eating how they are accustomed to eat, certainly not experiencing the luxuries that they were accustomed to. They sacrificed all of that just to be in the presence of the king. And they did this without knowing really who Jesus was or what he was going to do for them. See, we have the benefit of being able to look back. We know who Jesus was. We know what Jesus did for us. So I ask you, have you devoted some time this season to praising God for what he has done? Or have you gotten so distracted by the general busyness of the season that it has completely passed you by? Remember the white noise generator we turned on a little bit ago? You remember what happens when you've been listening to this for a really long time, and all of a sudden you turn it off?
Thank you.
But all of a sudden you hear sounds that you didn't hear before. The silence is almost deafening, right? It starts to get a little uncomfortable almost when it's that quiet. But see, I think we're supposed to do the same thing during the Christmas season, at least periodically. I think we're supposed to remove all the distractions, set apart some time just to worship God for who he is and what he has done. Pick a time where you try to stop thinking about finishing your Christmas shopping. Stop worrying about where everyone's going to sleep when you go to your in-laws. Stop stressing about the decorations, about the food, about the gifts, and start praising the God who gave us the reason to celebrate. Right? Now, to be honest, it would seem awfully hypocritical to me if we spent all of this time talking about how easily we get distracted from worshiping the creator of the universe, sending his only son to this earth as a lowly child, born in a feeding trough, surrounded by the smells and the sounds of livestock, living a humble life of a carpenter, and eventually suffering a humiliating and agonizing death on the cross. It would seem a little off point if we did not end this time by worshiping the very creator and the Son who willingly came to this earth to die for us. So this morning, we're going to do things just a little bit differently. We're going to close out our service by offering our praise to him. We're going to sing to the God who did all of this for us. So join me as we thank him for what he has done for us.
We want to stand. An incredible opportunity, incredible words to pour out our praise, our worship. To sing these words with us. Worthy is the Lamb.